This computer. Welcome to the Slow X Archery Podcast. I am Nikki Haverstock, and I am here with my co-host, Teresa
Teresa
Johnson.
Johnson.
Yeah, so glad to have you. I was the very first episode, which was the introduction episode. I was doing it solo because I had to get it up before they would let me distribute it. And I'm like, chicken and egg. I want to have it live, but I don't want to, So anyway, um, uh, how are you doing?
Well, I think I'm first of all, I'm really happy that we're back,
Yes.
right? Can we
Yeah.
say, well, I guess we have to be child friendly, so we can't say we're back.
Yeah, we are marked as
Silence.
clean. We are marked as clean in the thing. So
Okay, but we're back. Um, yeah, I am doing okay. And I think for shooting my bow and keeping busy in this season of life and very excited about archery again lately. And so it seems like a good time for us to pick this back up.
yeah, I actually shot, it was funny because I shot 70 meters a week ago, and I realized it had been like 8 years since I had shot 70 meters. And I would have, if you had asked me knee jerk, I would have been like, oh, it couldn't have been that long. But finding a flat spot for 70 meters and
Yeah.
measuring it out is a little bit more work. If you haven't shot it, you don't have a sight marking for it. So I
Right.
shot 70 meters. I did an indoor scoring round. Like I did a tiny target indoor scoring round, which is a little bit of cheating, but I'm in a good place and I'm excited to talk about archery.
That's yeah. And what better time? We've got the Paris Olympic Games going on. It's a really and for anybody who gets really excited about the Olympics, this is really the end of one Olympic cycle and
Hmm.
a new Olympic cycle is beginning, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very exciting time as well because I think a lot of the people who are inspired by what they see in Paris are going to be picking up bows in the coming months and so, that next world record holder, maybe she comes from this current, group of fans, and maybe she breaks that Olympic record in 8 years or 12 years. So it's kind of
Yeah.
amazing to think about you know, what Paris sort of plants that comes to fruition in the future for archery.
Yeah. I mean, I have a student who picked up archery about a year ago. She's wanting to go to the next Paralympics. And so she's already really training hard. And people who are really looking to make the next team probably should be, it's probably a little late to start shooting. But if you are already an archer who is competitive, now is the time you really have to buckle down because you can't just be like, well, I guess in 2 years, 3 years, I'll start training hard. Like it needs to be
Right.
now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, those, if you think about from a coaching perspective, the long-term planning that has to happen, and, people kind of come up and say, oh, I have the goal of making a Paralympic team, or I have the goal of making an Olympic team. And that's a fantastic goal. But then there are so many steps and checkpoints on that journey, right? So if you're thinking Paralympic team placement in 8 years or 4 years, there are a lot of sort of in between steps that are really important to hit. And so there's a lot of, prior planning and practice and, dreaming and really, I think, taking notes and being methodical and learning that has to happen. And I think sometimes people look at the end result and say, how do I get there? Right. But it's
Hmm.
just like any other big goal that anybody has. You sort of wish you could just be at the top of the mountain in 5 minutes, but you don't get there without a lot of time and hard work. So it's very exciting to see what might come of this Olympics.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we have two tournaments because we're in the US. We have two tournaments that are happening
Hmm.
this weekend. One is a very big world famous tournament, which is Olympics. The other is
Yeah.
our USAT, as we call it, the US archery team. The fourth leg of the USAT series going on. So
Hmm.
want to start with the Olympics since it's the
Yeah,
bigger
I mean,
one?
I think I think if it's okay with you, Nikki, let's acknowledge just quickly like sort of the Buckeye Classic and sort
Yeah,
of
okay.
what
We can
they
start with
did,
that.
if that's okay. Let's do that.
Okay.
Um, so this weekend's USAC qualifier was in Ohio, which is the home state of Daryl Pace, who of course is, I think he was the athlete of the century, right? From named for World Archery for the men in the last century. He had an incredible career. And Daryl is also really continued in service to the sport. And many people may
Yeah.
not know that for years, when we had national championships in Ohio, Daryl would be out there leading the field crew and
Hmm.
moving bales and, hanging targets like anybody else. And so many people had no idea that they were in the presence of, somebody with such an incredible career in our
Yeah.
sport.
I mean, that was me when the first time I ever saw him, I think was at a California Cup, which was
Mm.
really interesting. It's a tournament they don't have anymore, or at least it used to be a USAT, I believe, when I first started in the early 2000s. And they did, instead of doing elimination brackets, they do a double round robin, double elimination.
Oh,
they did something really unusual. I only went the one time and I did not make the cut. And I cried the whole way home.
oh,
Um,
my friend.
I felt like such a failure, but it was very, very early on. It would have been like the first, I would have been maybe shooting recurve for maybe 13 months. So in
Hmm.
retrospect, I go, why were you so worried? That was no, but in me, it seemed like I have peaked. I have done all that anyway. But I saw him there. I had no clue who he was. I uh his form was a little different, especially if he was, and so for me, I was like, who is that guy? And someone had to be like, one of the winningest archers of all times. And I felt kind of like an idiot for not knowing that, because of course I was very young and I thought I should know it all. But absolutely underscoring what you're saying about he didn't walk around with an attitude. He doesn't walk around with an attitude. He didn't walk around 24 years ago, not now, but and that's true for a lot of people that are very big in the sport. If you don't know it and you don't see scores, they're not walking around with a an entourage or an attitude. I mean, there are people who do that. There are definitely people who do that, but
I
I
mean,
would say it's unusual.
and for those in our audience who may not know Daryl Pace, just to clarify, he has two individual Olympic championship titles and then two individual world championship titles. That for the United States is just phenomenal. I mean, for any country, that's phenomenal. That's an incredible, in a very difficult field that he was competing in. He at the time he was competing, he was the best of the best. And
Mhm.
I really want to just take a moment to say thank you on a personal note to Daryl. So, some of our listeners may not be aware, but my husband, Butch Johnson, who is a five-time Olympian and a two-time Olympic medalist,
Mhm.
passed away about 2 months ago. And, Nikki, as you know, because you're one of my very best friends and you've been here through all of this, and I am so thankful for you. Um, but the archery community has really just rallied close and really, I think, lifted Butch up and lifted me up. And, at the SoCal Showdown, which was the first tournament after Butch passed, Justin Hewish, who is one of Butch's Olympic teammates and a good friend, made stickers, decals with
Mhm.
Butch's name and the legend on them, which is what they used to call him. And Justin made sure that those were on people's bows and had a moment of silence for Butch. And just this past weekend, I was told by a few people that Daryl held a moment of silence on the field for Butch as well at the Buckeye Classic. And I'm so, we're obviously going to be celebrating Butch's life on August 31st. For anyone who hasn't heard that, you can reach out to us if you want details. If that's something you want to attend, let me know,
Mhm.
let us know. But anyway, the point is that Daryl really went out of his way to recognize Butch, and I'm so grateful for that. It's been a difficult season in my life, but my
Yeah.
connection to archery brings me a lot of comfort, and the connection to the Olympics and to our sport, it really keeps Butch close. So thank you very much to the team at Buckeye Classic for doing that. It meant a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of a weird time to have the Buckeye Classic. This is something that we discussed in text message, and I was like, save it for the
Yes.
podcast, because it's occurring with none of the Olympians, none of our US Olympians can attend. It is We had to go through all the rules to make sure we were up to date, because I was out of date with this, which is that in order to make the USAT team, our national team, you have to attend 3 of the 4 USAT events, which is Arizona Cup, SoCal Shootout, Buckeye Classic, and then Gator Cup.
Gator Cup.
Gator Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of thought it was unusual that theoretically our Olympians could not be attending this event, but my assumption, it is unusual. It is
Yeah,
does
so
not normally
like
happen.
I remember when I worked for USA Archery, which for those of you who are new listeners, if you don't remember us or know us, so I worked for USA Archery and then World Archery and the Archery Trade Association for many years in marketing communications in various capacities. And when I worked for USA Archery, one of the things, so much thought and effort goes into planning those events, and I want to
Mhm.
just really give a shout out because remembering what it was like to work on the field, and Nikki, you did too, right?
Yeah, I
You
did a
worked with
couple.
us at nationals, and um, it's a tough job, it's not the easiest job. And I think as event, I don't want to ever speak for USA Archery. I haven't worked there in many years, but I have to give Rod Menzer and their team a lot of credit because you do your very best to try to find a schedule that works for as many people as possible.
Yeah.
You're dependent on having bids from,
Yeah.
cities and states that want to have your event there. You're also competing with other for example, like if a town wants to have the event but they can't offer all the hotel nights, they're like the
Yeah.
capacity that the event needs, then because there's like a giant cheerleading competition in town that week, then
Right.
there can't be an archery tournament there. So I think, but to your point, Nikki, I think that it is, always probably the best thing is to have the Olympic team at an event because it's so inspiring for the
Hmm.
fans, right? Like I think one of the best things about the sport of archery is the fact that we could go to nationals, next month and shoot on the same field as Casey Kaufhold, who's our,
Yeah.
#1 world ranked female recurve archer, and also, our leading, our top qualified U.S. female athlete in Paris right now.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for sure. When I took my student to her first tournament, which was Arizona Cup, and I flew down at like 5 in the morning so I could be with her on that, and then flew back that night at 9 p.m. because I was like, that was the only way I could make it work financially. We got to sit there and I got to say, that's Casey. And she'd already been following her for a while when she got into the sport. She started following a bunch of people. But it's pretty cool. And then be like, okay, put your binoculars up. That's Justin Hewish and that's Brady. He's gonna, you know, most likely be at the Olympics. And I was right about that, but kind of run down the line and be like, these are who the different people are. And she just could sit and watch them. And that's such a neat thing
Yeah.
to have. So I'm sure that they didn't, my guess is they had no choice but to put the events, the
Mm-mm.
two thing, because they couldn't have done it a week earlier and a week later wouldn't have really changed anything because they still would have been shooting. So there was
Yeah,
3 weeks that were kind of blocked out if they wanted to try to avoid. And I don't know, I haven't been to Buckeye, so I'm not totally sure. You might know this. Um, if they're having to use facilities that are not dedicated, so like in SoCal Shootout, they're shooting at
right.
a Easton facility, same with Gator Cup. Um, and in Arizona, they're not, but it is a dedicated archery field. But sometimes you're shooting at places that they're not dedicated archery fields, and so you've got to compete with lacrosse
Absolutely.
and soccer and t-ball and baseball and all that kind of stuff. That's got to really narrow down. Like when we would go, almost every nationals for sure has been that situation.
Right. The other thing too that I just want to mention is if you think about the schedule so we had a very rigorous Olympic trials process this
Hmm.
time.
Yeah,
We had a lot of events, which I think I loved seeing that personally because I think you really tend to do a better job of selecting the best team, the best athletes,
hmm,
when you're also selecting the people who can be the most consistent over the longest period of time, right?
right.
And, in an ideal world, I mean, it'll be interesting and I think it's a conversation for a future episode about, what is that timing like? How far ahead should you be choosing an Olympic team?
Yeah.
And we can definitely I know have some folks join us here on the podcast. I know Butch had a lot of thoughts about that, which I'll be happy to share at the time. But, I think there's always this very delicate balance about, how many events do you have? Where do you have the events? Where
How
is there
soon,
capacity
how
to have the
late?
event? Exactly. How close to the Olympic, the final Olympic qualifiers? How much time do you then give the team to compete as a team or to practice and train as a team? And so the bottom line is, I don't think there's knowing how packed that schedule was this past year with trials events. I can't see a way that USA Archery could have done it differently to have the team there because they get back from Paris and then you got nationals. Like
Yeah.
nationals are going to be like they're going to be home for, I don't even think they'll be home for a week. So so anyway, long story short, I think it's a great thing for the fact that those folks did get out to that event and did compete. And of course, um, one of the things that we mentioned in our text messages was, if you're trying to qualify for a USAT team spot and you're trying to, which is also qualification for World Cup teams, which
Hmm.
means funding, right? Funding
Hmm.
for training. Are those Olympic team members at all upset about missing Buckeye?
Right.
And I certainly can't speak for any of them because I don't know any of this for fact. But Nikki, you brought up a great point yesterday, which is that in all likelihood, because there were so many Olympic trials events that were tied in with the USAT events, those athletes would have had to have been basically having their three highest ranking events before nationals anyway at Gator Cup, Arizona Cup, and SoCal Showdown.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would have been really wild if I'm sure they were aware of it, but it would have been really wild if somehow they couldn't make the USAT team because they were busy representing the country in, the Olympics, but not
Yeah,
a problem
yeah,
because they were run not quite concurrent, but like next to each other
yeah,
with the events. And what I do love seeing um is that when we look at the people who are at the Buckeye and who are placing, they are many of the people who just missed out on going to the Olympics. And the reason I say I like seeing that is that it's not uncommon and it's totally understandable that a lot of people finish their Olympic run and then just are kind of gone. I mean, sometimes we never see them
oh
again.
yeah,
I mean, that's kind of standard is that we lose a lot of athletes. They do that run and then they're done with the sport. So I love looking through and being like, yep, 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 yep. I'm seeing a lot of names. I'm seeing a lot of people. Um, I love seeing that. And I want to give them props, because you're pretty heartbroken. Some people missed out by only a little bit. The men did not qualify a team, which had to be, it was only a little bit ago, less than a month ago that they didn't
yeah,
qualify.
and that was such a heartbreaking it was a heartbreaking situation. And I think when you think about any Olympic year, you're thinking a lot about both sides, right? You're
Mhm.
thinking about the men's team and you're thinking about the women's team. And the hope and the expectation certainly is that you're always going to qualify six spots, right? Three men, three women.
That's the goal.
Um, it's the goal, and it's always the hope. And it hasn't always been the case. And this year, I was so thrilled to see this women's team qualify and get their spots the way that they did. And they are such a going back to, so the last Olympics that I actually worked was London 2012. And it's funny because every July all those memories pop up for me on Facebook. And that was a team that we really didn't, they went down to the wire. It was the
Yeah,
very last qualifier where those women, and I think you were at that
I
tournament,
was.
right?
Ogden, Utah. Yeah, I was there covering it
That's right.
just for a related to the TV show I did. We had a channel and we did some news stuff. So yeah, I was there and it was really like down to the wire, the last thing, tears,
Hmm.
crying, the staff was
It was
crying, the girls were
incredible.
crying. It was really, there are so many competitive countries. It is never given that we're just gonna
Right.
like walk in and grab, certainly not in the history for women. It was a little bit more common for the men, but it is like, as this year proves, it is not a given that we're just going to grab a full team spot. It has to be fought for every single cycle.
Right. And, so I think if I am, which I'm not, if I'm working in high performance coaching right now, I'm thinking pretty hard about what is our long-term planning? What are we doing now? What are we doing in a year, 2 years, 3 years to make sure that those athletes 4 years from now are in the best possible shape to not just, depending on what those qualification procedures look like. Now, actually, Nikki, let me not say that, because remember that in 4 years, we're the host country because
Yeah,
we're in LA, which means we have all six of our spots
I know, but you shouldn't be.
automatically.
I mean, it's a good point to consider, but it definitely. I mean, we need a. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be. I changed, I guess, is the simplest word for it. But I mean, there should always be this drive for growth and for excellence and for
Listen,
improvement and all
you're
of that.
not, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I would love to see them, because here's the thing too, is if you think about the depth in the talent pool, right?
Hmm.
Like, what does the athlete pool look like now? The reality is, in all likelihood, certainly history has shown differently in archery, right? But in all likelihood, the three men and the three women, and we're not even talking about the Paralympics yet, because they haven't happened yet,
Yeah, we'll
right?
talk about that when we get
Paralympics
to
will
it.
happen down the road, but for the Olympic team, those three men and those three women, in all likelihood, are competing right now. Like,
Yeah.
they haven't not picked up a bow. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
They're not 8 years old. They are what, and again, every so often
Yeah.
someone surprises everybody, but to some extent, our team selection procedures, I will make a bold statement and say they are sort of designed to make sure that someone can't just get hot, go on, get hot at one tournament, make an Olympic team, and then, not be at the level of consistency to really be competitive in that field.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they've
So
changed
I
our
think,
our system a lot to try to really address that, because the question is you need someone who on their worst day is still really good as
yeah,
opposed to their best day, because it's like
right.
the statement about a professional is someone who can still do the job on their worst day.
Exactly, exactly. And so, in thinking about how we build from, not just to have an incredible, because it's not just qualifying a team for LA, which, okay, we may not have to qualify the team, but we certainly want to go win those gold medals, right? So it's what are the things that we do right now that put, and I think it's not just, none of this is just World Archery or USA Archery. It's it's our coaches, right? It's
Hmm.
the athletes themselves. Archery really is a team effort. If we think about excellence in our sports, it's the manufacturers, it's the clubs, it's the retailers,
Support,
right?
just, being able to
Yeah,
practice because you're not working three jobs or,
right.
and the same with
So
the
there's
coaches. The coaches have to be able to afford to coach.
in and when the athletes competed in 2012, I remember this whole team behind the team thing that the USOPC put out, right? And so USOPC, for our newer listeners who will hear that acronym a lot, right? And it's the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee.
Hmm.
Um, and so the USOPC had this team behind the team campaign to talk about who were all the sort of the unsung heroes of getting all of these athletes to the Olympic Games in 2012. And so I think the reality is the seeds that we plant now we're really going to see the results of that in 2 years at the World Championships,
Hmm.
or in 4 years. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. And speaking of which, a lot of work is getting done in Paris right now. There's a
Yes.
lot happening over here.
Let me pull up my results.
I'm very excited to talk about the women. I mean, like, yes, obviously we're excited to talk about the men, but I feel like for
The
too
man.
long, you know, for so long, the men we haven't had a super dominant female athlete on the recurve side in the United States in a long time. And I'm not saying we have had great ones. We've
Yeah.
had amazing, but we've not had one.
We've not
So
medaled
we
since
have
88. Bronze team. I happen to have it open in front of me. That's not just
bronze
from
team, right,
memory.
which was Denise Parker's team,
Hmm.
right? So, and I'm just going to say one thing. I'm going to give like a teeny tiny shout out to all of the people who came before the people who are current right now.
Hmm.
So like our friend Justin Hewish, right?
Yeah.
Justin and I talked a while back. We were talking about Butch and his celebration of life, and Justin was talking about how important it is for people to know the history of this sport, right? And like,
Yeah.
because
He's great.
like
He's great at that.
he's phenomenal, and we definitely need to
Force him.
force him. Buy, beg, borrow, steal, whatever to get Justin here on the podcast. But um, the other thing is, we as individually, I think we have not seen such a dominant woman with a #1 world ranking from the US in female recurve. I mean, I would have to go way back to see the last US female recurve archer who was world ranked #1.
I don't, my history. So I started the sport in 2000, August
Mm-hmm.
2000. So it is coming up on my 24 year. And my sort of awareness of the sport sort of faded in, because you,
Yeah.
you show up, you don't know anything. I was very aware of Justin Hewish because he was a local to where I was training at the time. So I
Mm-hmm.
knew everything about him before I actually met him, but my knowledge before that, I fully admit, is not as extensive as it should be, other than, when you like meet people like Denise Parker. And so then you
Yeah.
go, oh, then you go and you hear all the stories about this and that. But I don't even know how, if they followed world ranking back in, 88. So I don't know. So sometimes I have to kind of guess, but my guess is that Casey Kaufhold's position is unique and incredibly rare for the US,
Yeah.
at least in decades. And the sport has so dramatically changed from, over the decades, you know?
I listen. So, I think the last time we had a woman who was approaching that level of dominance, everybody was wearing white on the archery field,
Yeah. That was right
right?
before I started, right?
Um, and the other thing is, so, Casey just went out there and shot and shot lights out. She
Yes. So let's
qualified
let's
#4. Go ahead. I know. I'm ready. I'm so excited to talk about everything that happened. So shut me up and
No,
like,
no, no,
yeah.
you're good. You're good. I was just like, we talk actual numbers. So to catch everyone up, if you're listening to this later on, at this point, we have had the qualifications for the men and the women. That was a couple days ago.
Yep.
This morning, the women's team shot. I have not been able to find those scores because they are really hiding them away. And I was at church when they aired it. I should have like forced Teresa to watch it and do a check-in. But the men's team have not shot, the mixed teams have not shot, the individual eliminations have not shot. So we had the women's team. Casey qualified fourth,
Mm-hmm.
672, great score. Third was 673, fifth was 671. We had 670s for 6 and 7. So very, very tight field. #1 qualifier, Korea, not a surprise. She shot a world record, an Olympic record. Unbelievable. What was your first thought when I texted that to you? You
Oh
had an
yeah.
immediate response. What was that?
Yeah. I mean, I just was so, well, there are a few things I was, very, so first of all, I was very excited to see a score that high. I was so happy to see it. I was so happy to see it come off the women's side of the field. I think that's
14
always so
points
exciting.
above the
Yeah.
Olympic record.
And let's just talk for 1 minute about her first half. So she dropped 7 points in her first half. She shot a 353 out of a possible 360. And we just don't see, I mean, we see scores like that when people practice, right? We know that like our US athletes are capable of shooting over 700 in practice. We know that that happens. But to do it on the world's biggest stage, and for people who don't know, like if you, especially if you haven't watched it, or I'm gonna try, Nikki, I will message you some pictures that I took when I was in London of what the media area looked like from inside. So they call it the mixed zone, right? Which is the area that as the athletes are leaving, or the athletes are actually shooting the ranking round, there's this massive area on the side of the field called the mixed zone, and it's where all the press are. And two things that are really noteworthy about these scores and why they're such a big deal. The first is that when the athletes raise their bows to shoot the first scoring end or the first practice end, the noise from clicking camera shutters, even in today's world of mirrorless cameras, is deafening.
Mm-hmm.
It is like, I cannot explain to you how loud and how overwhelming that is. And then the other thing is that at the Olympics, and some of our listeners may know this and some may not. So the archery ranking round is typically almost always shot on the practice field. The finals field is where all of the elimination rounds take place. So the sort of, and what they do is they usually have a day of what they call familiarization, which is
Yep.
when the athletes go out and they practice on the final, the finals field, the competition field. So typically on the practice field is where you have that massive, like basically all the way down 70, at least in London, it was all the way stretching almost to 70 meters, packed full of journalists and photographers. And then when the archers exit, just to give everybody a sense of the pressure that they're under. So when they exit the field, every single time they exit the field, whether they're shooting a match, they're shooting a ranking round, it doesn't matter. They will go through a mixed zone. And that is where the journalists and photographers have first crack at the athletes. Now, the athletes, having media train these athletes, I can speak to the fact that frequently, especially if they're like going from, let's say the quarterfinal to the semifinal match, we would not want them talking to the press, right? And so there's always this push and pull because, the media want the athletes. It's good for the sport. It's good for a lot of things when the athletes talk to the press, but it may not be good for the athlete, and it may not be good for the chances of a medal, right? And so anyway, there's so much pressure on these athletes, and that will translate when they start shooting on the competition field, right? Which it sounds like they did today for the women's team rounds. The cameras, so not only do they have a huge mix zone, but then they have cameras on a track in front of the athletes, and the cameras are moving back and forth in front of the athletes the entire time they're shooting. And then, of course, the other thing you've got, which you typically do not have, at least in the US, is you've got a massive, like billboard, bigger than a billboard display. So essentially, you're shooting at the target, and the target is next to a camera angle of you, right? That can be a really disconcerting kind of thing to compete in. So anyway, the point is, these are phenomenal scores. And I am also curious, as the last thing I'm going to say about it, I'm very curious about what the weather conditions were, because to see scores this high on an Olympic field, typically that means it wasn't super bright, it wasn't super hot, it was quiet and pretty still.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was thinking of. One of the first things you said is the conditions must have been amazing. Not to belittle any of the scores. It's
No.
just a matter of, I've spoken to a lot of Olympians, and a lot of them talk about how incredibly challenging it is. When we shoot, this is something that my para archer is saying all the time, because she is saying, we shoot here, we're on top of a hill. It's a pretty long shot. We get pretty steady winds in Colorado, plus the hill thing. And she was really surprised when she went to Arizona and people were talking about how bad the wind was. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I had to tell her, I'm like, this is not, I mean, we've been in Arizona and I've seen dust devils come through. Remember the year where like everybody's scopes fell over and they broke because they hit so hard.
Yeah.
And so, I had to explain that a lot of people who train back east train with high trees around them or this or that, different conditions. And the same thing happened to her when she was in California. She's like, I just realized that what we practice in here is what other people consider really windy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. But that being said, the conditions around the field, and it does seem that I don't know if it's this, I don't know the aerodynamics of it. It seems like the setup to have the Olympic shooting with affects the wind. And so it's very usual to talk to Olympians and they'll say that they're shooting, they're aiming off to the edge of the target, they're aiming at the next target. I remember it was um okay, we're back. Teresa has a new dog and the dog was barking its head off. So we had to pause so she could go. But when she said, let's pause, I was like, oh my goodness, I thought I had said something really offensive. And she's like, how could you say that? So no, so we're back. And I was just saying that it seems like it's incredible. I think it was, I can't think of where it was where people said the wind was so bad. It was like a vortex and it was like going
Oh, that was Athens
Athens.
in
Yes.
2004. And Butch would tell horror stories about that it was like it would swirl, it would start to swirl, and then it would move in a different direction. So they were holding off like almost a whole bale, and
Hmm.
they never quite knew what the wind would do in Athens. And it was really a very famously challenging, wind and weather situation. Um, and the one thing that I wanted to mention too is this phenomenon of so very, I would have to look, and I'm gonna make it a homework assignment when we come back and do like our next episode. I really want to learn how many times the top qualifier has actually gone on to win the gold medal.
Great question. Because that's what we were discussing. Because it's easy
Yeah.
to look at the number one seeded archer who just shot a world record, just shot a Olympic record, is 6 points above her second place, which is her
Yep.
co-competitor from South Korea. But then we're talking 21 points ahead of third place, which was People's Republic of China. Yeah, we'll go look it up and we'll find out because that was one of the things we discussed. Is it's easy to start saying, well, obviously they have the silver locked in when that is not the case. That
No.
is it's anyone's day. I love seeing so many names, countries represented. So when we look down the women's line, we're seeing South Korea, People's Republic of China, USA, Turkey. Um, we're seeing Germany, Mexico, Indonesia, Austria, India.
Yeah.
I just heard a little voice behind me. Japan. I love seeing that because you just go, it's so much. Well, I shouldn't. This is my bias. This is my bias for archery being an amazing sport to watch, is that it's not like some of the sports where you look down the line and you just see a couple of dominant countries. It really could be
Hmm.
any countries. They could win a gold. It would
Yeah.
be unusual for it not to be a Korean. For instance, today the Korean women, South Korean women, did win
Hmm.
the team round, and someone said it's been 20 years running, 24 years running. I'd have to look that up, that they have won the women's team gold. Um,
Hmm.
so so it would be a little unusual if they didn't win that one. But I mean, you can't the worst you can do is just start counting these things as automatics and just start saying, of course they're going to win. Of course you're going to win. You're going to give away points. You're going to be a little sloppy. You're going to be a little loose in your shooting, and you're going to give away points with the assumption that, they're unbeatable. So why even bother trying? I don't think
Yeah.
anyone
And
does that, but
well, and I'm going to sort of, you know, just throw something out there for the fun of it. So, if we look at the rest of the rankings for the women, we've got Catalina. I'm always nervous that I'm pronouncing her last name wrong, but it's G Noriega. So I'm not sure if it's like if the G is silent. Noriega. I apologize. I'm very sorry for butchering your last name,
you
but
can
we
come on
love
the
you.
podcast and correct us.
please come on the podcast. Tell us all about Paris and tell us to pronounce your name correctly. And then we have Jennifer Muccino in 57. So Catalina qualified 38th, Jennifer in 57. So the reason I want to mention this is in 2012, there we were watching the men's individual. I was up in the press area, and a young man named Dan Olaru, who I think is still competing. He's from Moldova.
Mhm.
He was ranked like 58th or something,
Mhm.
maybe in the ranking round, comes out and gets really hot in the eliminations, because we don't ever know why someone ranks the way they do in the ranking round. Like, let's be super clear. You
Yeah.
might be 57th, but you're 57th out of 64 of the world's best archers all in one place. And everybody is bringing their A game. It's the Olympics. Everybody's been working for 4 years. You see countries that at these Olympic Games that don't go to World Cups that typically aren't on those fields. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of unknown quantities, right? And Dan comes out. He he um got really hot. So he ended up in a match against Jake Kaminsky from the US, who at the time was considered a medal contender, right?
Mhm.
He Jake is leading Dan like 5-1. And then Dan starts to push back, and he forces a 5-5 tie and then wins the match.
Yeah, I
And
remember that.
everybody's in the press area is like scrambling, right? And because the national abbreviation for Moldova is MDA. And half the journalists in the room didn't even know what MDA stood for. They didn't even know what country he was from.
Yeah.
So, and then he went on to beat Simon Terry in, I think, the
Phenomenal
1/8,
shooter.
phenomenal, like multi-time Olympian from Great Britain.
Mhm.
And I think Dan probably finished somewhere top 16, top 8, or probably the top 8, right? It was an incredible push through. Like, if anybody were to go back and watch the videos from London 2012 and watch those matches, they're amazing. And the point is, this was an athlete whose name nobody knew, ranked definitely in somewhere between 50th and 64th, and managed to come out and really upset those brackets. Because the other thing, remember, is when you have an athlete, if we look at brackets, right? So if you're new to archery and you're listening to this podcast, basically what happens is you get number 1 through 64, and then they bracket them, right? So some athletes might have what we call a bye, which means, but I don't think there are any buys in the Olympics. I could be wrong. um, so at any rate, you match basically athletes up against each other, and then the athlete who wins advances, and the athlete who loses retires, right? And
Mhm.
they're out of the competition. So
It's a lot like
I
if you're unfamiliar with it, it's the same idea as a Sweet 16. One goes
exactly.
against 16, two goes against 15, three goes against 14. Theoretically, it's designed that way so that theoretically, if everyone continues to perform well, you'll end up with perform the way that they have been. You end up with the same ranking. So you don't have one and two go against each other the first match, knock each other out. Um, too early. And I'm putting little quotes around too early because what does that mean? But that's the theory of how it's set up. But of course, um, I one time did, it wasn't perfect statistical analysis, but I did some, and it's there's certain people who do shoot up. That's very common. Where
Yep.
the coach that I had, I worked with Lloyd Brown, and all of his athletes shot up, is what he told me. So that,
Yeah.
and that including Justin Hewish, which is not really his athlete, but they did work together. But that was sort of what I was told, is that, you some archers really benefit from the head to head. Every arrow now counts. Those of us who maybe are a little bit more, easily distracted. I don't know what it is. Maybe one day I'll go to grad school and get research on it. But there are people who struggle with one head to head competitions, and there are people who do well. And then everybody else is sort of in the middle. It's sort of in that, like, maybe you're just finding the person you're shooting against is having a hot day or a bad day, or you collect all your tens in one end, you know, because we went from the straight point sets to, which is another thing we can discuss. But
Yeah.
sorry, anyway, you were explaining the brackets for people who are
No,
unfamiliar.
no, 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 that's okay. But what I was going to say is sometimes people, as archery fans or archers, we get, and especially coaches are guilty. I'm just going to say it. I'm going to claim it because as a coach myself, right? Coaches are really guilty of looking at a bracket and sort of saying, well, I think I know how that match might go. I
Yeah.
think I know how that match might go. And so two things. First of all, it is anybody's game all the time.
Mhm.
Again, I'm going to say it again. You have athletes in the mix who no one has competed against in these past 4 years internationally, right? Because they don't necessarily typically send a team to World Cups. So there are some unknown quantities on this field. And then you've got I think this is my favorite point to make is that when you have somebody who does interesting things in the brackets, it really is that's part of the beauty of match play. It makes
Yeah.
it anybody's game. So like suddenly, you look down a bracket and you're like, oh, well, I certainly would expect that Kim Woo Jin or Brady Ellison would just go win, 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 win. And Brady and Kim Woo Jin are both very smart people and know that it, particularly at the Olympics, as you said, when people are facing all that pressure, the more pressure they have, the better they do, right? These are athletes that thrive on pressure. These are not like your garden variety archers at, I mean, sometimes they are the garden variety archer at the state championship, but typically these are archers who have been trained and trained and trained. They have gone to World Cups, World Championships. They have been pushed to their absolute limit over and over and over again. And they are still in competing in a field that's tough for them. And the smartest of these athletes knows that it's anybody's game on any given Sunday or at
Yeah.
any given Olympics.
And, you know, and it does do some really tricky things because when someone who um, was not seeded to win knock someone out, it kind of has this ripple effect through
Exactly.
because you look, I mean, I've done it. You look and you say, if I win this match, I'll go against so and so, and then I'll go over against so and so. You're kind of prepping yourself. And then all of a sudden you're like, who are you? I'm supposed to be shooting. And then you go, oh, they knocked him out. And it shouldn't ruffle you. And I'm not saying it does ruffle them. It's just a matter of the game is quickly changing, who you're actually competing against, expectations. And it really has to kind of, you have to kind of be in like, well, I mean, luckily for archery, the game itself doesn't change. It's not like basketball where who you go
Right.
against might be defense heavy and now they're offense heavy or they're, I don't know enough basketball to continue the analogy, but and our goal
Yeah.
is to hit the middle. And that doesn't change depending
Yeah.
on who you're shooting against. But I would lie and I'd be lying if I said that it has zero effect. It shouldn't have zero effect who you're shooting against. But in reality, we see it all the time. I'm trying to think of who it was. I wouldn't probably say it even if I did, but I had at some point noticed that there was, or maybe it was an archer who told me this, that there was a matchup that whenever it happened, it went the opposite of how it should go. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this happens a lot. You know, this would have been to, I can't remember who it was. Maybe someone will remember this. It must have been from 20 years ago or so, where there was two RAs. And it was sort of like the Achilles heel of one of them was the other. And whenever they went against each other, didn't matter how they were shooting on that day, so and so was going to win, even if the other guy had been higher. I'm pretty sure it was men.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to think of who now that's gonna bug me. I want to like go through and I'll like sit down and remember, but I think it was in the US, but it might have been in like Canada or one of the countries that we see a lot because we see a lot of countries. Arizona Cup used to be because it was a world ranking event previously. It used to be that the year of the Olympics, they would all come to Arizona Cup. And so you would see like the Swedish team, the Canadian team, Mexico, like every single time. Do you remember that? Oh no. Oh, you back?
Yeah, you were frozen.
Oh, well, and you were frozen for me. So, oh, my internet is unstable. How dare my internet give me
Ah,
problems? How dare it? But do you remember that when Arizona Cup, when they used to
Oh,
always,
it was a world ranking event and we loved it because I
yeah,
covered that event and we got to meet, like, we get to see archers on the field who were just so good at what they did. I can remember the Mexican women's team, which, by the way, props to the Mexican women's team.
yeah,
They won bronze today.
yeah.
Um,
Huge
and
congrats to them.
they always compete at such a high level. They're always an incredible team. They're very hard to beat. And they've had some turnover in that team as some athletes have, transitioned out of their Olympic, like their top four, and other athletes have come up. And that is a country that has shown a tremendous amount of consistency on the women's side for a long time. And
Hmm.
I give them a lot of credit. Um, do we know who got silver?
I don't. I've been. Let me pull up Instagram while we talk
Because
about
I'm trying
this.
to look at it and it's like it's not showing me.
No, I know. It shows
It's
them what
not
they were
showing the
ranked. So the
results
the U.S.
correctly.
women were ranked at the women's team was ranked at eighth, and then I believe they came in ninth
Hmm.
after today's thing. So that's totally, like I said, it's totally. I'm gonna look at Instagram. I bet you they have it. Who got what? Let's see.
So actually, World Archery has some phenomenal coverage. Of course they do. Um, oh, it looks like it was Chinese Taipei ended up with the silver. Nope.
Wonderful. Nope.
Wait,
People's Republic of China.
hang on one second. I'm reading this phenomenal article that this guy wrote. Um,
Well, let's talk about while
okay,
you find that
China.
out.
So it was South Korea,
And
China,
People's
and
Republic.
Mexico.
Okay. But speaking of we going on and on about the women,
Oh,
the men.
the men. Sorry,
So
guys.
no, you're fine. You're fine. So Brady Ellison, who is for us in the U.S., would be our only male who went. I keep forgetting that because I keep on instinct just to show what my bias is towards my expectations is that we would send a full men's team. We've sent a full men's team to the Olympics. What did I say? 84 was the last time we didn't send men, a full men's team.
Yes, it was a long time. And I think,
Yeah,
wasn't
80.
that
Oh
the
no,
Olympics where
84
we
we
didn't
sent one.
compete?
80 is the last time that we did not send three men. And back in 80, you could send two men. So people who aren't aware, you used to be allowed to send either one, two, or three men. And do you remember when that changed to either one or three?
Yeah, that changed in 2012. Because I think in Beijing we actually had two women compete. I think it was
2008, we had Katuna and Jennifer.
right,
So yeah, so that would have been the last time. So for those who aren't aware, the reason they did that was because when you have two of the same gender competing, you can't really do anything. So they sort of wanted to prioritize either sending a team of three so that you can do the team event, or one, you could do the individual. And then of course they added the mixed team, which would mean that if you sent one male and one female, you could still compete for a team medal. It would just be
right.
for the mixed team medal. And that
And
just gave
I
it more opportunity instead of it being like you have two people, you're taking up a spot, but you can't really compete in the team things. And when we qualified, you could either qualify for an individual spot. It didn't matter how many, it wouldn't matter if you got 16 individual spots, that still is only one. So it doesn't matter.
right,
Or you have to qualify for a team with the team. So it doesn't matter if you had a really great shooter who every single qualifying tournament he went to, he technically qualified for an individual spot. It would still only be one spot for that country, which is it's incredibly confusing. And even having watched this sport for 24 years, I had to pull up there's a dedicated Wikipedia page that I had to follow that tells you every tournament, how many spots are being given away, if they're giving away an individual spot or a team spot. It was a great resource, and praise the Lord for whoever made that because it was the only way I could follow it. So thank you to them.
yeah. And I will just I want to just add really quickly, just to underscore what you just said. The best chance of a medal at the Olympic Games or at any event is typically the team round. You are shooting against you have a smaller, bracket to get through, right? It's not a bracket, that starts with a 160 or a
Yeah,
132nd match,
we're
right?
typically looking
Or a
this year
164.
is 12. We had
Right.
12 teams for the women and 12 teams for the men. Um, and
And
so
so the point is that okay, so like let's in for the sake of efficiency, do we want to sort of like, I never want to make a prediction because you can't predict anything, but I
you
kind of want
can't.
to,
But we'll
I
say about
I
some
think we
favorites we're
should
watching. I will say
I
for
think we should
I was going to say, just if anyone's curious, for the mixed team, which requires just one man and one woman, will have 27 countries.
yeah.
There you go. So,
So all right, so let's back it up a little bit. So you want to start with the women's individual?
um, yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard for me to predict because it's like, I think an easy bet would just be to say that I'm just making sure I'm on the right page here, would be that a South Korean takes a gold. I mean, that would
Okay, so
be, that would be a guess that if I was going to have to, I actually asked my local casino if I could gamble on the Olympics, and they told me absolutely not. They said no, and we would never do that. I can't. They do sports betting, so it's not like I asked them something crazy. But the guy is just like, because of the nature of the sport and the inability to make predictions, it would just be something we would never do. So even people whose professional job is to take your money for gambling was like, it is just too hard to predict these things because we're talking about um you're talking about all of that. But I am thrilled to see Casey compete. I do think that she has the best chance of getting a medal for an individual woman from the US as we've had in a long time. Not to put too much pressure on her because we're proud of her regardless. Um but yeah, so that's something
so
I want to point out. And I think People's Republic of China is in a great spot to potentially make a really good run for something. And South Korea.
yeah, I would agree, and it's a bold thing to say, but I think Casey, when Casey was very young, I interviewed her for Archery 360, which was a archery website that the Archery Trade Association used to run. And so we used to do like, lots of content around archery. And I can remember Casey being, I think she was like 12 years old, right? And I remember interviewing her, and she was so excited because at the Lancaster Classic, which is a really nice indoor tournament in January each year, she got to, um, I feel like that was the year that part of Lancaster got canceled because of weather, like there was a
Yeah, I
terrible
remember that.
snowstorm or something. And Casey would have competed against her idol, which was Mackenzie Brown. And so it was like, I remember Casey talking to me about her love of the sport and just how pure it was. And I remember interviewing her coach, Heather File, who works or did work at Lancaster Archery Supply. And I remember Heather telling me that when Casey just went out there and had fun, she shot lights out. And that has always been, I think that is still, listen, that young woman works incredibly hard. I think she's one of the hardest working athletes we've ever seen on our women's field.
Mhm.
But to see her, she looks like she's having a good time there. And if she is just having the time of her life, then I think I like top four for her. I
I
really
love
do.
it.
I really think she could bring home an individual medal. And there's no pressure because, like, hopefully anybody who has half a head on their shoulders is keeping Casey away from podcasts and everything but the bare minimum in the mix zone, because She doesn't need to be in her head. She doesn't need to care what anybody thinks right now.
Right.
But I like an individual medal for Casey. And I honestly, I think that she could shake it up really hard. I think she could surprise everybody individually. Um,
Same for
and
the
then I have to be
mixed
honest,
teams.
and
For the mixed
uh,
team, I think the US is in a really good position for mixed team as well.
I think it's a really Brady is a really solid performer on a team. He's of
They
course
shoot
been
well
very
together.
dominant, shooting extremely well. They both are. Brady qualified. We haven't really talked too much about the men, but Brady qualified seventh individually, which is phenomenal. You have a very deep field on the men's side, just like you do with the women. Um, by the way, I think the other one who could land in the top four for the women is Alejandra Valencia from Mexico.
I was going to say
She is
Mexico has
such a
been
phenomenal
Mexico,
competitor.
India, Germany, Turkey has been
Yeah.
have all been really strong powerhouse countries, really producing um some amazing archers. So yeah, I'm definitely keeping my eyes on Mexico. They just they got third in the team. So they're really catching some fire with that. Um yeah, and my attitude is I think athletes would be more offended to be left off the list of competitors than to be put on the list of competitors. But I'm not, I mean, I'm looking all the way down at, it's all the way into the 60s. Is there
Yeah.
someone
Oh,
here?
absolutely. There's no taking Catalina or Jennifer out of it by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, but
Yeah.
speaking of the 50s and the 60s, Nikki, do you remember that story I told you just a few minutes ago about Dan Olaru? And look at him, he qualified 18th. I am so thrilled to see it. That is phenomenal shooting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was so young, in 2012. Like I'd have to look up his actual age. But I think on the men's side, I think for sure it's two South Korean archers. And then I think the ones that I'm looking to see do really well. Of course, I'm biased, obviously, but we want to see Brady, really perform at his peak, especially because he's the only US male athlete we've got there. But Mete Gazos from Turkey is a
Yes.
phenomenal shooter. And
Well, he
I
got gold last time, right?
he did. And then the other one I would love to see do really well is Marcus Dalmeida from Brazil. And I think he could really make a run at it too. And then I would just add that down in the 20s, okay, like between 19 and 23rd, you've got three phenomenal athletes. Jean-Charles Valadon, and he has been competing for a very long time and he's on his home turf. And there's something to be said for that. Mauro Nespoli from Italy. The
Hmm.
Italian men are always tough. And then the other one is Steve Weiler from Netherlands. And Steve is another one that I think could really surprise everybody. So I feel like this men's field is like wide open and it's a tough field.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about the score difference, the score range. So when we look at the women's side, we're seeing a 21 point difference between first and third. We look at the men's point difference, 21 points brings us down to, we're talking the 20s, the 30s, the difference. And so
Hmm.
the women's field, the men's field is tight, tight, tight. We're talking about, a 686 to an 82 to an 81, 81, 81, 78, 77, 76, 76, 76, 76, 76, 75, 74. I mean, we're talking points. And I was watching it live because I thought they were done and I missed it. And there was a ton of shuffling. So when we talk about, sixth place being at 678, and we're talking about 15th as being a 673, that is a lot of places that are indeterminate. I mean, that is not a difference. Like that is, you cannot say, oh, well, they're 10 places behind, so they're clearly going to lose this match. We're talking 2 points, which could be any two ends. You grab any two ends from um uh between them in their rounds and you go, yep, they could have won or they could have won. And that was something. So for those who aren't familiar with the set system, so the way that the set system goes when we were doing brackets is that you shoot head to head, you shoot your 6 arrows, Whoever wins, even if it's 10 points or if it's 2 points, you get 2 points. The loser gets 0. If you tied, you each get 1, and whoever gets to 6 first, right?
Yeah.
So now I'll tell you, one time when we switched, it used to be straight points. So it used to be you just shot
Mm-hmm.
18 or what used to be 12 or 18. This is so long ago, I can't remember. You used to do 3 ends of 8 of 6, and then you would do 4 ends of 3 or something. Remember, you would, never mind. Teresa doesn't remember this. Okay. Anyway, let's just say 18
Eh,
points, and you would
Well,
just run them.
it used to be 3 arrow. They weren't sets. They were just, you were shooting for score.
You were just shooting ends, and they would
Right.
add up
But
all
they were
the
three
ends.
arrow ends. Yeah.
And they used to do, okay, anyway. I'll pull it all up. I'll find it again. Because it used to be you would do some and then you would switch to a lower number with fewer or whatever. But the idea was you just added them all up. It didn't
Right.
matter if you shot, and then they changed it to make it more gripping. But the point is, when I first switched over, I did a comparison. If they had shot the old method, would the same people have won? And what we
Mm-hmm.
found is most times, yeah, it really didn't make much of a difference when we're talking about first place against 62. Now, where it does change is when someone would like have one bad arrow. And
Yeah.
so they, you could never make it up in straight points. If you like dropped a 2, you could never make that up a lot of times. Um, or when it was just kind of inconsistent, you shot a 58 and then a 54 and then a 58 or something like that. And the other person was just shooting 58, 58, 58. There was very few situations when you were really far apart in ability. But when you got closer, you could have that thing where you could shoot 60 to 59, 60 to 59, and then you shot 154, and it could really change everything. I don't know if I'm explaining it. I'd have to show you
No.
some numbers, but the idea is that when we're talking about people being 1 point difference, it is literally anyone's game. I don't know that I would even
Yeah.
bet if you said, is Brady, does he have a better chance at a 677 against someone who shot a 676? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know if
Yeah.
he actually really has an advantage. Um, anyway, it's a long way to say when we're talking about any of these matches, there's really not, you can say that Woojin, am I pronouncing his name correctly?
Kim Woo-jin. Yeah. Yeah.
Kim Woojin probably has an advantage over someone say in 12th, but when we're talking about 4th versus 12th, we really are not seeing a noticeable, predictable, I think this is what's going to play out. So I bet you we even see some upsets in the very first round.
Yeah. I think so. The other two countries that I would just sort of say we really want to be watching on the men's side. I mean, I mentioned JC Valadon from France, but you've
Yeah.
got two other French archers ranked really high. So, and I cannot emphasize enough um, the home court advantage in terms of cheering, in terms of support. The other thing is India. I mean, India looks really strong if you look at like where the overall team has, how they've done.
They've done
Um,
phenomenal all season. We were watching them really closely because in the last opportunity to qualify a men's team, it
yeah.
really came down to the last spot you could get for the men's team was through world ranking. So what they did was they had 2 spots left, and they took
Hmm.
all of the men's teams because there is world team rankings, and the top 2 teams that did not have, I didn't watch the women because our women's team had one. We were excited. We had all our focus on the men's team. The top 3 teams that could have qualified were India, People's Republic of China, and the US. And if I remember correctly, which team was it People's Republic of China that kind of had it locked in, or was it India who had it locked in? Do you remember?
India had it locked in. It was really down to the US and the People's Republic of China. And there was a world archery investigation regarding conduct around the way that those arrows were shot. Um, the US shot I think 2 3s and a 5. And there was some allegation of misconduct around how those arrows were shot. Um, and my understanding is that the resolution for that, World Archery did publish that there
A
had been an
press release.
allegation. Yep. And then my understanding is the way that that was resolved is that that team essentially was disqualified from that particular World Cup. So in
Yes.
other words, their scores were thrown out. And I think it's not, I think, everybody has sort of moved on from that situation. So it's probably a
I'm
good
not even
idea.
sure how many people know about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just saying, I mean, I think it's not just moved on from it, but sort of never even heard about it.
Well, I mean, that's fair, Nikki. That's very fair.
So
Um, but I will say, when we look at this men's field, I think there's so much depth here. And I mean, listen, I've been like, oh, it could be Korea, it could be USA, it could be France, it could be India. I think the bottom line is, and individually, you have Florian Unruh from Germany sitting in third. So I think the bottom line is it's just such a deep field that it's
it
anybody's game
is.
over this.
The Southern Korean team, both men and women, hold place 1 and 2 on both the men and the women's side. It's a good guess to guess that they will probably South Korea will probably, if I was a betting woman and there was some place for me to bet, I would bet for both.
Sounds like you wanted to be a betting woman,
You
Nikki.
know what? I don't tell me that
Listen,
that wouldn't be kind of fun if we could actually parlay some of our years and years of watching archery into, get $20 bet, but my bet would be that we see South Korea take home. A very safe bet would be at least one medal individually between them.
I think
I would
that's a
say even
super fair
two.
bet.
I would say
I,
even
I,
two, but they do not. It could be any of them, though. Truthfully, it could be any of the ones from South Korea. They're mostly placed really well. But I would not count out that anybody else on this field could get into the top 3 medal spots. However that looks. I'm excited. I'm excited to see it. I love seeing just the variety of flags because we're on the Olympic site that has the listing with their little flags
yeah,
next to them. And I just love that you're seeing like this is what the Olympics is really supposed to be about, which is this idea that where you don't just see one country just go down the line and have like the
right.
top 50. And it's not like basketball where our men's basketball team is so much more dominant than a lot of their peers. Where we really could see countries that are, there's countries on this list that are placed in the top 20 that I've never met an archer from. I'm sure you have
Oh,
because you've gone to
absolutely.
places, but they're not at every single. And there's countries that are really doing well. Colombia is doing amazing. Um, who 20 years ago weren't, you
This
know.
is an excellent point that Butch used to make a lot. He would say this all the time. Remember he competed in 5 Olympics, right? So that's a long, from 1992 to 2008. So that's what? Hang on, I got to do some math. 5 Olympics, 20 years? No,
Well, kind of. I mean, it would have been 16 years from the first or
16 years.
17 or
Right. Yeah,
something,
yeah.
depending on how you want to count it. But he was
And
but the thing
then,
is he was an amazing competitor before and after that.
oh, absolutely.
So
And one
we
thing
can
that he
say
would
30,
say,
35 years that he was where people were, where he was aware of international competition in a really personal way.
yeah, and he would say that there would be countries coming up that 4 years prior weren't on the map, didn't have the development, the finances behind an archery program. And then, this is the thing, right? And I always say, well, I think, and this is a topic for another day, but like what makes a great archer, right? And I always think you need 3 things. You need drive. Like you need incredible passion for it. You have to want it on such a high level. And then you have to have hard work, right? You have to
Yeah.
have the work ethic. And then the very last thing, and probably the least important, is you need some modicum of natural talent. Because I don't think I don't think gifted archers are born. I think for the most part, they get there because of hard work and determination. And this is the thing, right? Is I think we have so many archers on this field, particularly the ones who maybe are coming from countries that are, not historically super dominant. They're hungry, and you can never ever discount a hungry athlete.
Yeah.
I'm just going to really quick before we start to wrap up. I just want to really quickly mention the men's team event. So, you've got, I think, first of all, I have to like France. I mean,
Yes.
they're the home team, they're ranked number 2. And I would also add really quickly about the whole cheering thing. So when we were in London, um, we were at the venue was Lord's Cricket Ground, and like the line to get into the venue was all the way around the outside of the of the cricket field. And there were people from the South Korean team walking around the building handing out like
Yeah.
noisemakers and Korean flags and like saying, "Do you want to cheer for Korea? Here you go." So like they literally would recruit fans, which is not, there's no hate here. Like I think that's some amazing hustle. Like they're very serious about wanting their team to have the most noise in that stadium.
Yeah.
Good on them. But I'm saying, so what I am thinking about is the advantage. And I remember too, Great Britain, how they did at that games. They had
Yeah.
such excitement behind them. You cannot underestimate the power of encouragement. So I like France. I like India. I like Turkey. And of course, South Korea.
Yeah. Yeah. Just for people noting that they will be shooting while we're sleeping tonight, the men's team. So we'll find out
Mhm.
how good these predictions are tomorrow. And then after that will be the eliminations for a few days, and then we'll do mixed teams, and then they'll do the women's finals. I do have to say, as a competitor, having the eliminations be like a couple of days before the finals is a little nerve-wracking. Don't you kind of feel like there's a little bit of, if you fought your way into the finals and then they're like, okay, well, we'll see you in 3 days.
It is, although I have to say, and I was actually discussing this with somebody else that I know with sort of some Olympic experience, and we were saying that historically archery is not able to attend the opening ceremonies because of
Hmm.
when archery competes. But this time, our teams were actually able to attend, our athletes were able to attend, and I'm really happy that they had that experience. I think that's really important. Um,
Yeah.
the very so I think, Nikki, if we have time, I feel like we should be recording another episode as we get
Okay.
into the finals,
Let's do it.
especially if we have, some US contenders. And one of the things that hopefully we can talk about. So if we have a medalist from the USA, what I would love to talk about is the part that very few people know is what happens after the medal is won. Like, what does the athlete actually do for the next 12 hours? And it's kind of unusual, and it's a process that not a lot of people know about.
Oh, I'd love to hear. I'm sure you've told me before, but offhand, I can't remember. I mean, I know that it's like a
I'll leave
little
you
more
in suspense.
chaotic. Please
It's
do.
extremely chaotic. It's crazy. It's crazy. And the interesting thing is when I was chatting with Justin a few weeks ago about Butch's celebration of life, he was telling me some of his experiences after winning a medal. And it was actually the same process in 1996 that it was when we were there in 2012 in London.
Oh,
So, but I
interesting.
will, yes, but I'll share a little sort of behind the scenes info on what those athletes, hopefully we have some athletes going through this process that we can speak to what it's like.
Love to. Love to have that. Okay, so we will go ahead and sign off, and we will talk to all of you soon. So bye from
Yes.
Nikki.
Bye from Teresa.